Savannah Chrisley has a few questions when it comes to her parents Todd and Julie Chrisley's prison sentencing. Specifically, the Growing Up Chrisley star questioned why Todd and Julie were sentenced to serve 12 and 7 years behind bars, respectively, for their tax fraud case, while the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City's Shah was sentenced to serve 6.5 years in prison for her own fraud case. "Put the cases side by side, and it makes no sense," she said on the Jan. 17 episode of her Unlocked podcast. "It just doesn't." While the three reality stars were all sentenced for similar reasons, Todd and Julie for wire fraud and conspiracy to commit bank fraud, and Jen for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering in connection with a nationwide telemarketing scheme, Savannah said she thinks the differences in the cases come down to the victim statements. There were hundreds of victims who were elderly, and people that provided statements that lost their homes, threatened to end their lives, the 25-year-old said of Jen's case. "There were so many different things, and she got 6.5 years. 6.5 years, make that make sense." Todd and Julie were federally indicted in August 2019 and later found guilty by an Atlanta federal jury on 12 fraud charges in June 2022, which they pleaded not guilty to. But unlike the Bravo star, who pleaded guilty before her case went to trial in July 2022, Savannah stated that her family is standing by our truth that it is not guilty, adding, "There are no victims." On the podcast episode, which was recorded before Todd and Julie reported to prison on Jan. 17, Julie went on to note that during her and Todd's trial, there were no victim statements read. "There were no victim statements received, to our knowledge. That, specifically, is exactly where Savannah said that none of it adds up. To me, there's more to it," Savannah concluded. "And from this, I have committed myself to figuring out what that is and for us to get to the other side of this so that we can help other people who are going through things like this." Jen is expected to report to prison on February 17.